All right, folks, I want to welcome you to Resume 101, part of the Prepare for the Fair series. My name is Brian Rowe. I'm a Director of Experiential Education in the AU Career Center. I have my colleague, Linda Golden here, who's behind the scenes, and she'll be helping monitor the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right, so we are here talking about resumes. This is a session that is designed primarily for resumes from the ground up. So perhaps you are a first-year student or a second-year student and you've not been to an event like the job and internship fair, or you have more of an academic style application resume and you want to make it into a resume that employers are looking for. That's really what we're going to focus on today. We're going to take a look at the components of a resume and really talk about how you best can demonstrate your skills and competencies. All right. What is a resume for, right? And what does it do? It should project your experience very assertively, your skills, your competencies, right? This is a document designed to be read very quickly. In the North American context, it's usually one page for the first several years of your career. After you've been working a decade or two, often people will have a two-page resume. It's fairly rare to see longer than 2 pages unless you're in certain industries. And those industries would be medical field, like a doctor, academics, so your faculty members usually have a different style that's longer than that, and also attorneys, lawyers will have a different style. You'll often hear the term CV, curriculum vitae, used for those fields as well as abroad. But in the US, we're typically looking for a one-page resume for new professionals. As I said, the design of this is to be read quickly. When I ask students how long they think their resume is looked at by an employer the first time around, so the employers are looking at resumes, they're deciding sort of yes pile, no pile, then the yes pile, they'll go through a little more. How long, when they're in that decision-making yes, no phase, will they look at a resume? Students often say a minute, 40 seconds, 50 seconds. The average is between 6 and 15 seconds. So it's very quick. They're making a very fast assessment of that resume the first time around. So the design that we're recommending is to sort of help you in that very fast situation. And again, it's emphasizing what we call transferable skills. These are skills you may learn in one situation, but can be useful in another situation, as well as often in very particular specific skills based on what you're looking for. So what do employers look for in a resume? I mentioned transferable skills. What you're seeing on the screen now are really good examples of these foundational transferable skills. We find this information from an organization called NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And we ask employers, what are the skills that you're really looking for in folks coming right out of university, right? So what is it that you are looking for, for them to demonstrate that makes them an attractive candidate for your positions? And as you can see, these are probably not really that much of a surprise to you. Always communication and teamwork come up. A certain level of technical savvy that will vary greatly by job. Leadership, equity and inclusion, which can include cross-cultural sophistication. You're able to work effectively with people from different cultures. That's international and domestic, right? Different worldviews. Critical thinking, obviously, can you assess a situation and make a recommendation for a solution? Professionalism, leadership, career development. Career development is that question when they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 7 years? They really want to look at how are you deciding on your path forward, right? So these are examples of many of these are good to have on your resume and to demonstrate on your resume. And we'll give examples of that in a few moments. Okay. The resume design, right? When you're looking at your design, this is, it needs to be a document that has clean lines, clear fonts, and is aligned, right? It should look at that first glance to be orderly. That's very important. And you, again, the skill presentation, the skill should be obvious very quickly, that you're demonstrating. And the resume design should follow a consistent pattern. So as they're looking very quickly at this resume, they're mapping sort of the information, and then they're going to follow that map as they follow through on the resume, right? So you want that design to be very clear. I have an example on the right, and again, I know this is a little small on your screen. This specific example lives on the Career Center webpage. If you go to our website, american.edu/career, you will see a square that says resumes. If you click into there and look on the right, you'll see resume examples, right? Style examples. So this is taken directly from there. You're welcome to take a look at that whenever you'd like. But as you see this sort of visual representation, it's full on the page, but not too crammed. Sometimes a resume can look really, really crammed. What that does to the reader is it sort of makes them think, well, this is going to be kind of tough to get through. So either they're going to accelerate the review of the resume, or they might stop reading at some point. And you have to think about that in your resume design. At any point, the reader may stop reading, right? So we don't build to a big finish. We don't save the best for last or the bottom of the resume. We tend to sort of front load and top load important, significant information so that they're engaged and they want to keep going. Font size, I would recommend between 10 and 12. If you go smaller than 10, then it starts to look really, really dense. And then larger than 12 is a little bit too big. So often 11 font is a good font. Please do consider using standard fonts. I've had some experience looking at resumes when filling jobs, and it looked like Elvish to me. I mean, it was difficult to read. I understand the intention was to kind of stand out by using a very non-traditional font. The problem was it was hard to read, so I didn't honestly read very much of that resume. And you can also use bolding, but use it very strategically and don't over bold on a resume. So maybe you decide you're going to bold your titles in your experience section. That's fine, right? That's going to catch the eye, but not over bold. And this example resume is one that works for a majority of employers, especially in the DC area. However, if you are a creative professional, you will include more design elements. Graphic designers, for instance, their resume design will not look like the example on your screen because they need to incorporate some of their skills in designing their resume. So there are different examples of that. You can see those on our website, and then also talk to your career advisor because they're going to understand the resume designs that work for the fields of interest for their students. Okay. The 3 sections I recommend you always have on your resume. Always have education, experience, and skills. There are other examples of sections that you can have, optional sections if you have room, but really resumes should have these 3 sections. If you look at resume designs for folks that maybe have been working for many, many years, their education section may be at the bottom. As a new professional, we recommend your education section be near the top to demonstrate your educational credentials right away. And by the way, I'm going to show you an example of each of these as we move through. So, but these are the 3 sections that I think you always should have on your resume. Education, again, your most recent degree first. So within each category, you're going to have reverse chronological, most recent first, and then you move backwards in time. So you're going to have your study abroad on there if you've studied abroad. Relevant coursework is a nice part of the education section. It's an optional part of that, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment, but you can sort of highlight 2 or 3 courses that are really relevant to the position you're applying to. And that may mean that the relevant coursework changes frequently before you send out your resume. First and second year students, it is certainly appropriate to have high school information on there, listing your high school, or having significant experiences from high school on your resume. Absolutely fine. We usually recommend by the junior year that information begins to transfer off the resume. And then certainly transfer students should include their previous institutions in their education section. Now, if you took one course someplace in the summer, there's not the obligation to put it on your standard resume. But I think if you've completed a semester or 2 at least, then it's appropriate to have it listed on your resume. And here is an example of the education section. You can also see, by the way, your name on your resume, as well as the location. Now, location, this can be used strategically. So if you're looking in DC, for instance, for the summer, you may have the campus address on there that signals to the reader that you're a local candidate. If you're heading somewhere else for the summer, put that address on there, because again, it serves as an indicator of a local candidate. So that's the way to handle that. Again, there's your education section. So you want to indicate that you are receiving a bachelor's degree, you're at American University. You can include the school. Many AU students will put their school on there. And then your major or your intended major. We do give an example of CLEG, because CLEG is an interdisciplinary degree. So you have this sort of combination on there. And there's in our example, we're showing how you could show the CLEG major. You want to have your month and date of graduation. This also lets the employer know sort of where you are in your academic progress. And if you're a graduating student, they know basically when you'd be available for full-time employment. GPA, I get a question a lot about GPAs. So GPAs don't have to be on the resume. If you have a high GPA, it is an indicator of academic success. Some employers would like to see GPA. Sometimes they'll ask you that in their applications, but I would say not the majority of employers. And if your GPA is above a 3.5, I think it's great to highlight. If not, then don't worry about it. And by the way, that 3.5 tends to be creeping up, right? I have heard an employer say recently 3.6 or above. So I'm starting to hear 3.6 and above. So again, that might be creeping up a bit. But for now, I think it's good advice. If you have a 3.5, you can go ahead and list it on your resume. And by the way, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A area, and then Linda will be reading those out as we come to the end. So your questions will be stored, but feel free to put those in whenever you like. All right, we're moving to the experience section. Now notice I didn't call it work or work history. We call it experience very specifically because it will incorporate different types of experiences, right? So certainly part-time jobs, internships, if you've had them already, volunteer experiences, leadership, academic work, course kind of projects sometimes you put together really help you develop your skills. These all are appropriate for the experience section. Some folks will have an optional category. You'll see examples of this in some of our resumes where you have campus and community service. Maybe the student decided to kind of set that out, especially based on something they were applying for. That's again, that optional category. If you're looking to do a position that's really public facing, or you may have to give presentations or tours, maybe you'll create a presentation section under your experience section, but and separate out those types of experiences. But really, experience should be the vast majority of real estate on your resume. It's going to be the largest section, and it can cover all of those entries. And you want to structure these very similarly, even if it's a course project or a volunteer experience or a leadership experience, uh, or an internship or part-time job. You're going to structure that. That's that sort of structure similarity, so the reader can look through very quickly and see the expected information in the expected spot as they're reviewing. The style that we usually advocate is called a bullet style chronological resume. So that's where, in our example, and we'll take a look at that in a second, you have these sort of sentence fragments that start with action verbs. There's no personal pronouns, but they really get to the point and they're easy to read, and they sort of stand all on their own, each of the bullets. An alternative style is what we call a paragraph style, where they're all kind of run together. That's okay, but if your paragraphs get too big, people tend to skim them too quickly, right? So that's the issue with that. And then I often get asked, how many bullets per experience? I like to say at least 3. You'll see in some of our examples we have 2. That's all right. I think 3 to 5 is good. Now, if you've had an amazing experience and it's really relevant to what you're applying for, and you could go a few more bullets, that's okay too. All right, here's again that close up. I'm going to show you another one in a second, but you have your experience section. In this case, the title is first, the name of the organization, often location will be in there. And then you have these bullet statements starting with action verbs. And we have good lists of action verbs kind of based on different skill areas, for instance, that we can help you with. It's best not to repeat the same bullets, right? Or the action verbs. So in your bullets, so use different action verbs. And also you see in these bullets, you give specifics when you can. So, working with 1,000 students, faculty, and staff. Sometimes you'll see percentages increased X, Y, and Z by 15%. Worked with a budget of $9,000. You'll see that. That helps anchor the reader in the experience. The trick with these bullets is you're giving a little bit of information that can be absorbed quickly, but you don't want to be too general, right? That is the trick. It's best to focus in on a specific skill or competency in that bullet than try to cover too much, because then you get vague, right? So an example that I like to give is, let's say you've done some volunteer work with a political campaign back home, and you write, one of your bullets is worked on political campaign. I have no idea the skills you developed, the experience you had really within that, or the competencies that you now possess, right? So you could have planned very large events, right? And then that comes with a whole host of skills. You could have been phone banking, that's another set of skills. You could have been office support, keeping everybody fed and, moving right along in their productivity, different set of skills. But if you just say worked on political campaign, as I'm reading that quickly, it won't register as anything, right? Because I didn't live that experience. Often when we're writing a resume, we're going to use shorthand because we lived that experience, and we're trying to encapsulate so much into this one little sentence. And you have to kind of fight that urge. You have to pull that apart and focus in on something specific. Your resume is by no means the sum total of your experiences and capabilities. It is a highlight. So you have to focus on that. Here are some other examples. We have a very useful document in the Career Center. I use it with students all the time. I know our peer advisors, when they meet with students to review resumes, use it quite a bit. And actually, our peer advisors from a previous class of peer advisors started this document. They created bullets, for instance, experience bullets, based on very common experiences that students have had. So you'll see, this is just an excerpt from it. Barista, babysitter, waiter, lifeguard, student athlete, there's a few more in the document, and you'll notice there's a lot of bullets, right? So I don't know that I'd necessarily have this, in the resume, but we wanted to give you examples, multiple examples under these types of experiences that are possible. And you'll see the style of the language that's being used within these. It's a little more formal than as we speak conversationally. You never lie in a resume, but there is a formal way of describing something. All right. And then that third section that is really you need to have on your resume is a skills section. Sometimes on a resume, I see a student kind of really writing their transferable skills here, and that's not as effective. So you want to stick to quantifiable, testable skills, if you will. So if you're describing your ability in French or Swahili, I can give you a test. There is a test. They can assess your level in those languages. If you're working in Excel, I can give you a test, and there's a standard test that comes back with results for that. So those are the types of experiences or competencies you want to highlight in your skills section. When I see things like excellent communication skills, right? Excellent organization skills, these are a little more difficult to test for, but they're certainly a valuable skill, as you saw from the previous list. What you would want to do is demonstrate these in context in the experience section, right? So that they want to see it in context, your communication skills, giving specific examples of how you use that skill. But in your skills section, you see it's not a very big section, but you want to focus on, again, software, tech, capabilities, and then a separate bullet for languages. I referenced something called the ILR scale. This is something I like quite a bit in language description. That stands for the Interagency Language Roundtable. You can go to that website. You can take a look. It's something the government uses, the federal government, in assessing language level. And the descriptors that I've used for French and Swahili are from there, right? So they're a way to try to be a little more specific. What happens sometimes when people describe their language ability is they say a word like intermediate, and that means different things to different people. So if you look at the ILR scale, you can find it and read about sort of these different levels. You can assess your level. It's a scale from 0, which means maybe you've memorized 2 or 3 words in that language. That's not real language ability, up to a 5, which would be native or completely bilingual. And then, a 3 is in that nice middle point where you can work in that language. You might have to look things up now and then. You're probably going to have an accent, but you can function in a professional environment with a 3. So, take a look at that. I think that's a good way to describe language levels. So that's the skill section. It's usually at the bottom of the resume. An exception to this is if I have folks in IT, in computer science, those folks will often put the skills section right underneath their education section. So it will come above the experience section. Some of the employers who are looking at computer science, IT, more of those tech-related fields, STEM-related fields, will often want to see right away, they need to see certain computer languages, for instance. So that there is sometimes that difference with the skill section. But for most students, I think the skill section should come near the bottom. Okay, in conclusion, this should be a concise description, focus on specific skills and competencies, right? Don't take a bullet and describe the organization, right? That's something I see sometimes. This is such a concise document. You really don't have the room and the space to describe, the organization you work for. If I'm curious about that when I'm looking at your resume, I'll look it up. I can easily look up an organization from your resume, right? So again, focus on your skills and your competencies that you develop. Remember too, the reader hasn't lived your experiences, so you have to be very specific and direct with your experiences. And then the resume, this resume is to encourage further conversation with an employer. about your candidacy, right? So its job is really to get you an interview. It doesn't get you a job. The interview process and that's the job of that experience. So, all right. Questions. Why don't we go to questions? Linda, do we have any questions that have come in?
We do.
Okay.
We've got one so far. Should we
Okay.
assume that employers accept international students as interns if they do not specify it on the Career Fair app or in Handshake? And they say thank you.
Sure, that's a great question. There are, well, let's see. So some employers, just by the nature of who they are, can't accept international students as interns. Your federal government, for instance, the executive branch in particular, usually there are a few examples where that might work, but often that's something you want to clear up right away, right? Other than that, I think usually an employer will, and even the federal government is usually pretty clear about that in the job posting. But if they're not able to accept international students, they usually say that right away. So, yeah. Good question. Now on the resume, right? Sometimes, especially in international, globally oriented internships and experiences and full-time positions, sometimes they request that you put your citizenships on the resume, right? That's not usually the way it works in the United States, but there are situations and examples where it's a good idea to do that. So, and it would actually appear fairly higher up on the resume. Also, another example of something that should appear on your resume, if you're a student who has worked in an internship and gotten a security clearance, and it's an active clearance, that's something that would go on the resume, often in the skills section down at the bottom. Other people put it really high up at the top, especially if it's really clear that the position you're applying for requires it. So.
No other questions at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll give it a second to see if any bubble up. I would recommend folks, if you're, again, maybe you're translating your academic kind of AU, if you've applied to AU with a style of resume that I would call an academic application resume, which tends to be more lists of engagements and not that sort of skill descriptor, those bullet statements, I would take that. And again, that will mean that not everything will fit on that one page, right? But start to take that and translate it, develop some of those bullets, get started on this. And then if you come to the resume station, there's this working document that you and the advisor can work on, because you're going to get about 15 minutes at the resume stations, certainly longer for appointments, right? And then also the peer advisors have drop-in consulting, career advisors have drop-in consulting. So these are all possibilities, but it's great to kind of go in with something in progress, and your resume will always be in progress. You know, it might be done for now, but it's a living document. It's going to sort of change and evolve as you move through your career trajectory. So,
all right, we've got two more questions. I really like this one. Is there any particular font that you think is favored?
You know, well, Linda, you might weigh in on this too. I don't know necessarily. It's just the very kind of ones you see all the time. What are some of them, Linda, that you think make good kind of visual, clean lines?
We see a lot of Calibri and Times New Roman.
Right.
Mine is, I think, in Garamond.
Yeah, those are all.
I don't have like good advice on this, but I do think that there are some fonts that are preferred for screens versus for like print. And so I think that's just something, you know, you can do a like quick Google on that.
Yep. Right.
But yeah, I think if you're That's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I agree with that 100%. Something else about resumes too is in some instances, I don't know, you may have heard that joke where you craft this document and it looks great and you've worked on it so long, and you apply to a place and they say, upload the resume and then input this into an application. And it's basically everything from the resume you have to retype or copy and paste into the application. Some usually larger organizations, not the federal government though, will use, at least not yet, will use kind of tracking systems. And basically they take your resume and the font and the style and all of that doesn't matter. It's sort of processed into something that looks exactly like every other resume. So you have to be prepared for that. There is some advice too in writing those resumes if they're using one of those applicant tracking systems. There's a different way of writing a resume, much like there's a different style for federal resumes, usually not for internships. Internships in the executive branch of the federal government use what we would call standard, just what we were talking about tonight. After you graduate, if you're applying for certain positions in the federal government, then there's a slightly different, longer style. Forget the one page, then they'll be going longer. Do we have some other questions?
Oh yeah, they're coming in now. All right.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
an additional 3 here. Jeremiah says, hello, I am a freshman applying to a medical internship that focuses on public health education. Would this change the format?
I would say no. I think the format we've been discussing tonight will work just fine. I mentioned doctors, like medical doctors, MDs will have a different style, but I think for a public health internship, the style that we've been describing tonight will work just fine.
All right. Any insights on how resume filtering software works?
That's a whole entirely different workshop.
That's another.
Yeah. Linda, we have somebody on staff who's actually pretty good at this. Rob San George is another SPA career advisor in our office, and he's done quite a bit of digging into this. He has some information on this too. Insight into that. So it often is counting words, right? So they assign words a value. As I told you, try not to reuse the same action verbs. It's almost the reverse. If you know that there's something, there's a kind of a system being used to analyze that initially your resume. Sometimes it's, kind of taking a look at the job. You always want to look at the job or internship description and kind of analyze it, right? I use a highlighter sometimes to go through what is kind of repeated. Sometimes you'll see a concept that's repeated. Sometimes you'll see the same word repeated a lot. That is one of the ways with again, not a federal internship. That's much more flexible. You don't have to worry. But with federal jobs, you can see these words and you're like, okay, I'm going to parrot these words back. Sometimes with those applicant tracking systems, that is a way to kind of raise your resume in the system. But again, if you were to do that to a human reader, sometimes they'd be like, oh, they keep saying the same thing over and over again. You have to take a look and sort of figure out which system is being used. Those applicant tracking systems are being used by really, really large companies and organizations. And honestly, they may not be used so much with interns as with full-time employees. And the federal government, to my knowledge, is not using those. You'd think they would, right? Massive organization. They still use people to go through. Now, the people may be told to count words, right? In your documents, certain words have a high value, so they're told to sort of count how many times to do that. But again, with internships in the federal government, if you choose to go that way, they're much more the very kind of standard application process.
Great, thanks, Brian. So for now, the last question that we have is, should we also include our education at AU on the resume, even if we haven't graduated yet? For example,
absolutely. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So absolutely. The kind of the rule with a resume is if something has started, include it, right? Now, usually you don't project into the future. I will get this, right? Because maybe not, right? But yes, the day you started American University, it should go on your resume. So everybody in here should have American University. The one sort of challenge that I've been wondering about is, that advice about if something's not official yet, don't have it on the resume, is major for first year students. You can have an intended major, you have, but it's not sort of official on the transcript, right? So that's a little tricky. For some students, they just don't list a major. They say Bachelor of Arts, School of Public Affairs, or College of Arts and Sciences. That tells the employer, sort of what. Honestly, most employers aren't so fixated on, having this major or that major. They tend to ask for a really large variety of majors. If you look in Handshake, the statistics on, the employers get to say, I want these majors. The majority of employers say all, right? So that's, and then obviously their accounting needs accountants, right? There are certain examples of that where they do need specific, but for the most part, yeah, they're not as focused on major.
Those are all the questions at the moment.
Okay.
I'm just gonna put the resume, the information from the Handshake resources into the chat so folks can find that common students
Great.
thing. There's an action word. Oh yeah, we've got some additional things from what's on the website. So let me just.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Another sort of technique that people will use, you have this one page you're going to submit to an internship application or job application. Some people create what's like I would call the master resume, where they're not worried about length. And this is a good way to do it. If you're really kind of creating your resume for the first time, don't fret. Don't worry about this one page. Just say what you want to say. Get it on the paper. Let it go longer. That's fine. We're good at this. The Career Center staff, the career advisors, the peer advisors, we're good at helping you kind of reduce. And oftentimes a student may say, here are a couple of internship listings I'd like to apply for. That's really helpful because you may have your master resume, which is 2 pages long. Maybe it's 2.5 pages long. And you've got these great entries, multiple experiences. And you may say, okay, I'm going to submit a 1 page. Let me just kind of pull these and put those in the experience section to have it be 1 page. But you've got this living kind of document that you really don't send out because it's too long and it's got kind of everything on it. But it's, then you can kind of plug and play. We talk about tailoring the resume to the position, right? Now that doesn't mean you recreate from scratch your resume every time you send it, but you really want to take a look, right? Like what are the skills they're looking for? And it's right in the description, right? It's right. If they're looking for someone to interact daily with the public, right? Then okay, communication skills and what examples do I have from my background where I'm, a forward-facing, front-facing, person-facing position that I can kind of go into detail about. So they're giving you what they want in that position description, right? In the job qualifications and the desired skill, they call it like desired qualifications. It's right in there. And again, usually the ones at the top of the list are more important to them than the ones at the bottom of the list. Sometimes you see repetition in there. Obviously, that's a signal that that's really important. So you should really highlight that in your resume.
We've got another question.
Sure.
How do you best personalize the cover letter? Does this link to tailoring the resume to the position?
Yeah, so we haven't brought up cover letters. That's again, I think it's a good another workshop to do. So a cover letter is a letter of introduction. It's called something different in different countries, but it's really introducing your resume. It's a chance to have a little bit of a sort of a professional introduction to who you are, your motivations, your interests, right? And then they look at the resume. So in the old days, it would, they'd open the envelope literally, and this letter would be there kind of highlighting which position I'm applying for, here are my skills and my, expertise. And then they would look at the resume. Okay, but this letter kind of told them which literal cubby to put it in, right? Now, obviously things are different now. I've noticed some employers will say no cover letter. If they say no cover letter, don't send one. If they don't say anything, I would send a cover letter. And some will say, please send cover letter and resume. Follow instructions. That's one way they cut applicants. If they haven't followed the clearly stated instructions, that's a way to kind of shrink your applicant pool right away. Because if you can't follow the instruction in applying, will you be a good intern? Or an employee. So yeah, the cover letter, you can go to our website, take a look. We talk about the structure of it. That's also one page. Some employers now, instead of reading the cover letter first, read it second. So they'll look at your resume, and if they're seeing what they want to see, then okay, let's see what they say in the cover letter. It serves as a little bit of a writing sample too, right? So, they'll see your writing ability. But again, same thing with the resume, maybe even more so, you're tailoring that cover letter. Again, look at that job or internship description. What are they seeking? And then you're going to talk about either your directly related skills or transferable skills, right? Oftentimes, let me give an example. So many students have had customer service experiences, right? Now, there are customers, there are clients, there are constituents, right? Capitol Hill, right? And in politics. And again, I think there's a lot of transferable skills. If you've worked with one group, you can use those skills and work with another group. One experience a lot of students have had is server, right? And every student I talk to who's been a server, I say, I bet you had to deal with some really challenging customers. And they're like, yes, we've all been there, right? So, and you had to deal with it professionally, and you had to handle the situation. And sometimes you had to escalate the situation and use critical thinking skills to kind of bring in a manager or something, but again, those are really good transferable skills to like a Capitol Hill office or to a private sector position where you're dealing with clients, right? So yeah. Do we have another question, Linda?
We do. What are the differences between a cover letter and a letter of interest? And then there's one more after that.
Yeah, there may not be a difference, to be honest. It may be, it's usually the same thing, to be honest. Sometimes it's even called a letter of application. Sometimes, again, this can be a country difference. I think in the US, you hear it called a cover letter a lot, or a letter of interest. It may be so maybe, let's say you're applying for a fellowship or something like that, that has kind of a really learning, leadership, embedded experience. Maybe they're going to call it a letter of interest, right? So what you're talking about in a cover letter, a letter of interest, a letter of applications, at the internship level, you're combining, here are my interests in learning, right? And this, because an internship is a learning experience. And here are skills that will make me a good intern, that I can contribute a bit and learn a lot. That's what you want to do. If you're applying for full-time jobs, it's more so, here are the skills that are going to make me, excellent in the job here. And those can be transferable, or they can be very specific. Transferable, again, being communication, teamwork, always teamwork. You can be brilliant at something. If you're just awful to work with, you're less effective, right? So those are those transferable skills. Something really specific might be a software, that's very specifically used in a specific situation. That's a real specific skill. So it's a balance of both. Employers, especially for new hires or for people who are starting out in their careers, really, those really specific skills are easier to teach than the transferable skills, right? So I've had a lot of employers say to me, if someone's got they're used to being a good communicator, they have experience on a team, they know how that can go really well, where there can be pitfalls in that. It's a little tougher to teach that, right? But it's really easy to teach a software skill, so do really think about those transferable skills. We often take them for granted, but wow, do you notice if someone is missing them? Did we get another
Okay,
question,
we
Linda?
did. For employment listed on CVs, how do we provide proof of employment? Do we need to at all?
Oh, interesting question. So your resume, there's usually not a confirmation of proof. And again, there may be some exceptions to that, right? And I don't want to confuse the audience by giving really kind of specific examples of that. But your resume, there is an expectation that you tell the truth on your resume. If they find that you've lied, it's usually grounds for instant termination. Like no discussion about it. No, it's just absolute instant termination. So ethically, it's wrong to lie, and it can have some real implications that can follow you too. There have been unfortunate examples of people who have really flat out lied on their resume, and it was detected in a organization, and it's been, they were not only ineligible to ever be hired in any way, shape, or form at that organization, but then that has ramifications sometimes within industries, right? So that goes beyond just one place. So ethically, you're going to be truthful, you're not going to lie. Again, there is a way of talking about your skills that's a little more formal, that sometimes in the beginning a student's like, wow, that makes it seem so fancy, right? But that is kind of typical resume language. That's not lying. It's just sort of a real formal way of describing something that we usually don't use in day-to-day conversation. So let me give one example of verification. And again, I want to be clear, this is not for most internships in the federal government, right? But for full-time jobs, if I'm applying for a federal government job, right? You have to list your supervisor and the supervisor's telephone number for each position, kind of going back in time. That is not, though, an expectation at all for internships in the federal government. And then they're going to they may call for verification, right? So that is really a place that I've seen that that's the possibility. But usually they don't. Now they're talking to your references too. So again, you get to choose your references, which, by the way, on the resume, you didn't see this sentence, resume available or references available upon request. Maybe people in your life who are older have that on their resume. That used to be something we would put on the resume. We don't any longer, because you have to have references, right? So you're kind of stating the obvious, and it's wasting a line on your resume. So you should prepare to have 2 to 3. I'd say 2 references is good for internships. 3 is great, just to have an extra. And then for full-time employment, 3 references, which can be a mix of faculty members that know you well, right? They're used to writing these. And again, pick someone maybe you've had multiple classes with, really good, academic relationship with. And then supervisors, right? So that's usually in internships, part-time jobs, volunteer positions, leadership positions. All of those folks can serve as references. Nowadays, most references, they'll make a call. Sometimes they'll send a link, and I've done it where I've had to fill out something online. That's kind of the new way to do it. I almost never get a letter. They want a letter. That's for graduate school. You will need those for graduate school and other academic preparation. Fellowships and scholarships often want something in writing, right? But for employment, it's usually they want to talk to someone on the phone. So you want to make sure you coach them. Would you serve as a positive reference for me? here's my resume, here's the position I applied for. I'm I've interviewed, they'd like my references, or, they want references even before the interview. Would you serve? That way, when they call me for the reference, I've got your resume in front of me. So I'm really current on what you've been doing and in the language you've used to describe your experience. And then I have the job. So for me, it's fun to kind of link your skills with the job I see in front of me. But, that's kind of my field, right? So, but you do want your references to be really, really up to date on the information. I once did not hire, this was at a previous institution, I did not hire a career advisor. They were it was neck and neck between two candidates. And I decided the kind of tiebreaker was going to be, let's see if I talk to the references, if anything one kind of goes above the other. And the one that was kind of inching above, right, and was going to be the first choice barely, I called her references and the reference went, huh? Like oh, she's back in the country. Oh, yeah. I could tell, completely caught off guard, surprised. And that was bad practice to me. And that, then I decided to hire the other candidate because her references were, yes, they like expecting my call, really enthusiastic and prepared to discuss the candidate's skills.
Awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you, Brian.
Sure.
There's no questions and we are getting up on the hour.
We are. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you very much. I appreciate the really good questions. Again, this will be up, Linda, right?
Yeah, I mean,
shortly.
probably by the end of the day tomorrow. So.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Please do visit the Career Center, your office, and make those appointments. Come to our events. Please take a look at our website. You'll see all the great events we have. And all right, do well out there. Thank you.